Hello, everyone. Go ahead and use the chat area to let me know if you can hear. I just turned the mic on. Oh, okay. I see a few people saying yes. Thank you. So I'll know that you can hear us now. You're here today with myself, Cathy, Fiala, and Gina Ohnesorg. We're two of the school psychologists here at ECU 8, and we're going to talk today about goal setting with DIBELS next. We are recording this session, as I just typed a little bit ago, and it will be put on the ESU 8 website. If there's someone who couldn't attend today, they can sure view this at a later date. As you have questions as we go through the webinar, just go ahead and type them into the chat area and we'll try to answer them as best as we can. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, so today our goal is that you will learn to draw an aim line, draw a goal line, also that you will try to know when it's necessary to set individual goals for students. You'll know after we're done today, you will know what those goals should be. And hopefully you'll be able to explain the goal setting procedure in enough detail that someone who's not here today could learn the process from you. And I know some of you who are attending, I can see that you are maybe the person who would take some of this information back to your school. So we're hoping that we're going to give you enough information today to be able to share with others. All right, so just starting with a little cartoon here. So we're talking about goal setting, and our goal is really going to give us the path to tell us where we're going to be going. So as the nomad is saying, stop asking me if we're almost there. We're nomads, for crying out loud. We definitely don't want to be nomads as we're going through progress monitoring for kids. We want to know exactly where we're going. So our goals are going to help us do that. Okay, we're going to start today with a poll, I think. Okay, and the poll that I'm trying to bring up here.
It won't let you bring it up.
Okay, I'm having a technical difficulty, just a moment. Okay, so our question here is, when you progress monitor, do you know the student's goal? So go ahead and respond to the poll, just to give us an idea of where we're starting at here today. Okay, so it looks like about half of you have a pretty good idea of where the goal is for the student, and the rest of us maybe know or maybe in between. So we're going to hope that by the end that would be 100% at yes. All right, thanks for your response there. Today we're going to just touch on the steps of data review. So most of you have just done your winter benchmark or did it right before Christmas break, which seems like such a long time ago.
Yeah.
Gina and I were talking about how we had to kind of dust our brains off coming back after break. So you probably already have your DIBELS data. And so once you have the benchmark collected, then it's like, okay, well, where do we go next? So what you're going to do is you're going to look at that class level data to begin the differentiation process using decision rules. And at your school, you may have decision rules written down, or you may not. And if you don't, that is something that you probably would want to talk to your school psychologist about doing. So we're going to use those decision rules to help us examine class level reports, which is from our screening data. And those decision rules are going to help us identify students for whom we know that we need additional data because they're not reaching the benchmark. Also will help us to decide which students do we need more information on. Do we need to validate some students using the DIBELS Next survey? Or do we need to use DIBELS Next survey to help figure out what's the right level for progress monitoring? And we're going to touch on those things today. But the real focus today is going to be on how do we use that data to set goals for students, appropriate yet ambitious goals. So that's going to be our focus for today. As we're looking at the information that we have in front of us, we always want to consider there are optimal progress monitoring levels for DIBELS oral reading fluency, or DORF. And as I work with schools, sometimes we see kids who, gosh, are we progress monitoring at the right level? How do we know what that level is? And so we have some standards that we use. And so for oral reading fluency, for DORF, it is the highest level of material that the student can read with 90% accuracy. And then along with that, we have some different words correct points that the students need to meet for different grade levels. So a first grade student would need to be reading above 20 words correct in a minute with 90% accuracy. And if they're doing that, then we would say, okay, it's appropriate to progress monitor them at that level. If they're reading less than 20 words correct or with less than 90% accuracy for a first grader, we're probably not going to get to see progress for that student. For second grade, it's above 40 words correct with 90% accuracy. And for third through sixth grade students, it's above 50 words correct with 90% accuracy.
And Kathy put that information on your cheat sheet for you, so you don't have to frantically write it down and refer to it later. It's right there for you.
Right, and we will be using that information later. So if you do have that first page of the DIBELS Next Goal Setting cheat sheet, if you have that, those standards are on there, those optimal progress monitoring level standards. Okay, and we want to keep in mind that it's recommended that we really would only need to progress monitor a student below their grade level if they are showing us that they're 2 or more years behind. So if we look at some survey level assessment and other information that you have about the student, maybe look at where you're instructing the student, and if you've done some placement testing and it tells you that they need to be instructed significantly below level, then you may also be progress monitoring there also. So if it's a fifth grader and it looks like they should be progress monitored at fourth grade, actually we'd recommend that you just go ahead and progress monitor them at fifth grade. What we found is that there isn't a lot of difference between maybe a fourth grade and a fifth grade, the results that you get on those progress monitoring passages. Usually they score about the same. So we're only going to go out of level if it's 2 or more years behind. And then survey level assessment is something that your school psychologist could help you with. And what that is it's a way to get some more information about a student. So if you look at the screening data and they didn't meet the optimal progress monitoring level guidelines, so thinking about that 90% accuracy and the number of words correct that they need to read at those grade levels. If they don't meet that on the benchmark, then maybe you need some more information to figure out the right progress monitoring level for that student.
And that is an informal assessment. So if you're asking your school psychologist for help, it doesn't mean that you have to go through getting permission from parents and everything to do that survey level assessment.
Right, good point. So yeah, it's not a formal assessment, it's more informal. Just a way to help us figure out the best level for progress monitoring and also to give you some more information about the student's skills. For phoneme segmentation fluency, which is PSF, and NWF, nonsense word fluency, we'll talk about amount of growth per week for oral reading fluency, but for PSF and NWF, there really aren't those standards. So what we want to do is we just want to get the student to reach the goal level for each of those measures as quickly as possible. So for phoneme segmentation fluency, or PSF, that goal level is 40 sounds in 1 minute. For nonsense word fluency, you can see that we have 2 standards. So it's 58 correct letter sounds and 13 whole words read. So we'd be looking at both of those things for nonsense word fluency. And we will go through some examples for goal setting with nonsense word fluency today also. Okay, so our next section talks about goal setting for DIBELS oral reading fluency, or DORF. Goal setting using DIBELS Next. Just to tell you, there isn't really a magical formula. This morning, I had grade level meetings at one of my schools, and we worked on goal setting for 3 grade levels. We got them all done. But there were some students that they kind of fell in between. So today we'll do some examples that seem to fit fairly perfectly because, Gina and I came up with that really great data.
Yeah.
So they fit perfectly. But when you're doing them in real life, there isn't always that magical formula. They don't always fit perfectly. So there are some that you'll have to make a little bit of a judgment call on, but the things that we can use to help us are research-based norms, or DIBELS benchmarks. And we are going to really be looking at the former benchmarks and not the recommended benchmarks. So we're using the former benchmarks today, not the recommended benchmarks. We're also going to be able to use growth rates for oral reading fluency. And just to keep in mind, we want to accelerate growth for students as much as possible. So because of that, we'll typically want to be able to use the next benchmark goal for the child's grade. So if it's a fifth grader, we want to just, if we're at the winter now, we want to use the spring benchmark goal for fifth grade whenever possible. But there are times when we can't, when that's not appropriate. Okay, so what if a student is significantly behind where they're supposed to be? Then what we want to do is set an ambitious goal, and we're going to talk about the process for doing that. Again, you use the next benchmark as the goal unless the rate of growth is just too much that it will exceed some growth rates that we're going to show you. So here are those growth rates. Here are these ambitious standards. Fuchs and Fuchs did a study in 1993 that showed us ambitious growth rates that we can expect students to make. So these standards will help us to set ambitious goals, but they're also reasonable because research has shown us that they are attainable. So for first grade students, on the left side of the chart, you see it tells you the grade level of the material. And then on the right side is where we're looking at the amount of growth that we could expect per week. So in correct words per minute. And a lot of you have probably seen this information before. And it's also on the chart that I gave you, the DIBELS Next Goal Setting Cheat Sheet. It's at the bottom of that page. So again, another piece of information on that page that you probably have printed in front of you. So when you take these things, these ambitious weekly growth rates or benchmarks into consideration, you can set a goal. And here's a way to write a goal statement. So you want to have the date in there. When is the student going to reach the goal? What material are they in? And what's the rate that you expect them to make? So for example, we could say by December 24th, Terrence will read DIBELS Oral Reading Fluency second grade passage at a rate of 50 correct words per minute. And that would be Terrence's goal. Oftentimes with schools, we're writing the goals at the top of the progress monitoring booklet, so we don't write a whole goal statement like that. I'll show you kind of the shorthand method that we use. But if you were writing this down on a way where you're tracking student goals, or if you're writing it into an IEP or something like that, then you certainly could write it as a whole goal statement like that.
Becky asked a question. I'm not exactly sure how to answer it.
Okay.
But we did discuss a little bit that the former goals are, kind of that minimal proficiency that we want every student to be at, and that's kind of, where schools are looking at right now. We haven't switched anyone over yet.
Right. As we do some training with some other RTI experts, what they're telling us is that they'd like to see schools reaching the former goals with getting at least 80% of their students to benchmark on the former goals. And then you could look at moving to the recommended goals. So I know on the DIBELS site it says, please use the recommended goals, but all of the schools that I work with are still using the former goals at this point, and so we just kind of toggle to those former goals. Okay. Goal setting with DIBELS next. So again, when the survey level assessment or other data that you have tells you that the student is going to be 2 grade levels behind and you're going to progress monitor out of grade level, we're always going to use the ambitious weekly growth rate for the progress monitoring level when you're setting the goal. So for example, a third grader who will be progress monitored in first grade oral reading fluency, we would expect them to make 3 words per week of growth. So if we look back at our chart, even though it's a third grader, we're not going to say that the child is going to make 1.5 words per week. We're going to say, because we're progress monitoring them in first grade material, we're going to go at this more ambitious level. And the reason being that we need to close the gap, we need to accelerate growth. So we're always going to set our goal. We're going to use the goal for the level of the material that we're using to progress monitor, not necessarily the grade level. And sometimes that's going to be the same, obviously, but for a student who's out of level, we're going to use the progress monitoring level, not the grade level, when we set the goal. Now I'm showing you this formula here today, but this isn't necessarily something that you'll need to use, but I want you to have it to refer back to if you want to use it. what we're going to use today is we're going to use, of course, our cheat sheet so we don't have to do the math part of it, but here's how you would do the math. So if you want to figure out, well, how many words per week would the student need to make to reach the goal, this is how you would do it. You would take the goal level, subtract their current data point, and divide by the number of weeks. And then you could compare it to that Fuchs and Fuchs chart. But again, for the charts that we have for us today, we've already done the math for you. So you won't need to do the math, but it's there if you want to refer back to it. So here is kind of our easy method for goal setting. And again, this is exactly what you have. I'm not going to read through it right now because we'll go through it, but easy method for goal setting is the same as what you have on your, if you've printed out the DIBELS Next Goal Setting cheat sheet, it's the same thing right at the top. So it tells you how you're going to use the easier method that we've come up with for you today. So for example, if you have a survey level assessment where the student has read 55 words correct per minute, and that could be a survey level assessment or it could be the benchmark that you just did. So they're reading 55 words correct per minute at 4th grade. And we know that for 4th grade, let's say that the next benchmark, so that would be fall data, the next benchmark is 103 words correct per minute. And the number of weeks to the benchmark is 15. So if we were going to do the math part of it, we would calculate, we would subtract the 103, which is our next benchmark. We would take 103, take away 55, and that's where we get this 48. So that's how many words total there are. Then we have to figure out, well, how much is it per week? So we would divide 48 by 15. And then you get 3.2 words per week growth that the student would need to make. Well, if we look at our ambitious standards from Fuchs and Fuchs for a 4th grade student, they would only be expected to make 1.1 words of growth per week. So expecting 3.2 words per week is too ambitious, which tells us that this goal of 103 is probably not realistic. It's very ambitious, but it wouldn't be realistic to think that the student could get there. So what we would want to do instead is we would want to set an individual goal for the student. Okay, and before we go on to Graphing 101, we are going to go through some examples, but before we go through examples using our easy kind of cheating way to set our goals, we're going to just talk about what a graph will look like. So that's our next section, is just talking about graphing and what your graphs might look like. A lot of you already know this information, but why we're going to graph, we want to graph that information so that it's visual for those of us who work with the student, so we can see if they're making progress. It's also a great visual aid to be able to show the student, to show them if they're making progress. Also, it's a great way to communicate to the parent how the student is doing based on the goals that we have set, and we can show exactly how the student is doing. We know that when we graph something, when we graph the data, we get higher student achievement. And that's in part because the student might be more motivated, and also is because the people working with the student get to see exactly what's going on with the student. So there's lots of good reasons to graph. So graphs just are great tools for displaying the data, organizing it, storing it, helping us to interpret the data, and also, again, to share the results about how our interventions and how our instruction is doing for the student. There's lots of different options for graphing. What I do most of the times in schools is we use the front of the progress monitoring booklets for graphing. There are lots of great web-based options out there, or Excel spreadsheets and graphs and all kinds of things like that. There's lots of good options out there. I guess just in my experience, I have found that using the front of the DIBELS booklets is quick. The teacher can chart it right away, can show the student right after they've done the progress monitoring. And it's just a good way to really get the data graphed right away. Mm-hmm. Okay. So this is an example of the what you might find on the DIBELS website. And it does do a nice job of showing us the data. It doesn't necessarily show us all the other things that we're going to talk about, which is phase phase change lines and those different things. I think there are ways to draw those in. But again, it means going to the computer after you've done it and going back to it, where it just seems easier to do it on the front of the booklet right away. So the key graph components that we're going to talk about, as far as the axes go, those are going to be on there for you usually, but you're going to have your left side and your bottom to tell you the weeks and the data that you're measuring. You're also we want to talk and make sure that you really are putting those phase change lines on your graphs, and we'll talk about the reason for those today. We also want to make sure we have the aim lines and the goal lines on there as well, and then of course your data. So here's what a graph should look like on the front of your progress monitoring booklet. Over here, okay. Over here on the left side, you're going to have the words correct in a minute, or the sounds. Across the bottom is going to just be the dates, the number of the weeks, and where the lines are already on the front of the booklet for you. The other parts are the things that you're going to be putting onto the graph. And so up here, this horizontal line up here is our goal line, and that is the line that shows where we're hoping that the student will get to. And you can see our goal line here is intersecting with our aim line. This dotted line here is the aim line, and that's kind of the road that the student's going to need to take from where they're starting over here to get to the goal over here in this certain amount of time, which is going to be here. We see that there are data points on this chart. So these are just all the data points here. And we see here we have these phase change lines, as I had mentioned just a little bit ago. We want to make sure that you're putting those phase change lines in here because it helps us to really interpret what's going on. So anytime you do something different for a student, you would want to draw a phase change line. So you can see right here, they wrote a little description and it says what they're doing with the student for intervention is core curriculum plus a supplemental intervention. So just a short description. You might be a little bit more specific. Sometimes it might just be that you changed the group size. You went from a group of 5 to a group of 3. So you would want to mark that. Okay, and then here they made another phase change line here. Okay, so another change that they made. And the reason that it's so important is that when we look at the data, we can see here the student was kind of following their aim line, but they changed something again here. They added targeted interventions. And so with those targeted interventions, the student even started making more progress. And so we can say that it's probably because of those interventions. So it was really important that those lines are on the graph. Okay. So again, the really key pieces of information that we want to make sure that are on your graph are the goal line, the aim line, and the phase change line. So to create the aim line, you will go from your starting point, which most of the time is going to be the most recent benchmark. So you're going to find the benchmark point, or if you have more data like a survey level assessment, you would put that there as well. And then you're going to find the spot on your graph where the date and the level of your goal intersect. So if it's by the first week in May, if that's when your next benchmark is, and the goal is 95 words, then you can see that that is where these two things are intersecting, is right here. The date and the number, the goal. And then you just connect the two with a dotted line. And
we usually bullseye the goal.
Yep.
Oh, did you say that?
No. So right, Gina's right. As we usually do a bullseye on that goal. And when we draw them on booklets, we usually just draw them with a pencil right on the front of the booklet or a pen or whatever. And we just make a bullseye with our pen or pencil and connect the 2 points with a dotted line. Okay, so we're going to do some examples. As we go through the examples, you're going to want to have your DIBELS Next Goal Setting cheat sheet in front of you, and also your 15-week goal setting chart, because all of these are going to be based on a 15-week semester. So here we have Ben. We have second grade student Ben, and he is, for second grade material, let's say on the winter benchmark, second grade material, he read 57 words correct in 1 minute with 90% accuracy. So if you go to your 15-week goal setting chart, you can find grade level second grade, and you can see the first column where it says 42 is actually the fall lowest score to make the benchmark. Well, we're not doing fall, we're at winter, so we're going to go over to the next column that shows your winter lowest score to make benchmark. What I did on this chart is I did the math for you to figure out if the student made this score, any score at 57 or greater means they would make the end of the year benchmark. And way over to the right, the last column shows you the spring benchmark, and the spring benchmark for second grade is 87. So any student who reads 57 words correct in a minute or more should be expected to make the spring benchmark of 87. So for Ben, if we look at Ben's data, and he is reading 57 words in a minute at second grade level. What do you think is going to be Ben's goal for spring? So go ahead and fill in the poll for your choices. Sorry. Do you think it's going to be 52 words correct in a minute, 87 words correct in a minute, 67, or 100? Okay, 100% so far. People are still answering. Right, so it's going to be 87 words correct in a minute is going to be the goal. So let's look at what that would look like. You can see up here at the top, this is usually how I have schools write the goal right on the front. I said there'd be just kind of a shorthand way that we do it. Right here, this is how we usually write the goal. Spring goal equals 87 words correct per minute. If it's a fall goal, we usually write it over on the left side. Along the bottom, we're usually writing the months like December, January, February, March, April, and May. And each of these lines on here goes by 4 points. Okay, so our goal here is 87, and you can see we drew the bullseye. Our goal line, this horizontal line, is drawn at 87. And then our dotted line here is our aim line. Where we started was 57. We want to end at 87, and so we connected the two with a dotted line.
And we picked to put the goal there because it's the end of April, and that's when most schools will be benchmarking again. But if you're going to benchmark in May, then you would move it over one more week.
Right. Yep. Okay. So let's go through another example. All right, so here we have second grader Emily. And again, you have your 15-week goal setting chart in front of you. So second grader Emily, she read 45 words correct with 92% accuracy. So I'm going to give you a second to think about what would Emily's goal be. And you can go ahead and fill out the poll. Okay, so Emily is a second grader, and she read 47 words correct in a minute. Or excuse me, 45 words correct in a minute. Now, if we look over at our winter lowest score to make a benchmark, you can see that the student would have to read 57 words correct or more in order to reach the spring benchmark of 87. So in looking at that, Emily read 45 words correct in a minute, so we would not expect her to reach that goal, the spring benchmark of 87. So if you put 87 in the goal, let's rethink that. Okay, so we're going to go to 57, and then we're going to look at, and I should have talked you through this, sorry, my fault. We're going to look at the ambitious number of words growth needed. So if the student read less than 57 words, which Emily did, we're going to take her score of 45. We're going to take her score of 45 right here, and we're going to look at the next column in our chart, which is the number of words growth. So I did the math for you already in making up this chart. I took 15 weeks times 2 words per week for ambitious growth, according to that Fuchs and Fuchs chart that I showed you. And you will see that then we need to add 30 words for Emily. So we take 45 plus 30 to get our goal. And our goal for Emily is going to be 75. So 45 plus 30 is 75, and that would be our goal for Emily. So the spring goal is going to be 75 words correct per minute. So here we mark that with a bullseye. We drew our goal line here, our horizontal goal line, and we have our aim line right here. And starting at 45 and finishing over here at 75. Didn't mean to trick you on that one, but I forgot to walk through that the next part of looking at the chart. I apologize for that. Let's go through another example here. Okay, we have a 4th grade student, Susie. And as you can see, for Susie, we had to do 4th grade material where she read 40 words correct with 75% accuracy. And if we think about our optimal progress monitoring standards, she is not reading enough words or with enough accuracy because it would need to be 50 and 90% accuracy. So we're going to have to go down to 3rd grade material, which is 45 words she read and 80% accuracy. Again, she still doesn't meet those standards. So we're going to go down here to 2nd grade, and we see that she read 55 words with 90% accuracy. And so we would want to set her goal based on this score right here in 2nd grade material. And we're going to go to 2nd grade. It's 2 years behind, so we would set our goal in 2nd grade material. So if we look at our chart for Susie and we think about what might her goal be. So we have her starting at 55 words correct in 2nd grade material. So if we look at our chart, our 15-week goal setting chart, and we go to the 2nd grade material, she read 55 words. Oh, she didn't quite read 57, which is the lowest score to make the benchmark. We're going to add 30 words to her score of 55, because that would be the ambitious number of words growth. And so her goal is going to be, I see some of you responded at 85 words correct per minute. Okay, now, a couple of you put 87, and Gina and I talked about this one earlier, actually. If we look at the next graph here, I did write that the goal would be 85. But sometimes I like to be even a little bit more ambitious because she was so close to 87, which is the spring goal. You know, I might just go ahead and set it at 87. And I actually had a couple teachers this morning that did something just like that, where they said, you know, they just need to make that end of the year benchmark. They're so close. And so it's okay to go a couple more words, but you just have to keep it pretty close to what the ambitious goal would be. So for her, we would say 85, 87 would also be okay. All right, I'm not seeing a lot of questions in the chat area, so I'm hoping that this is making some sense to you. We have another example to go through. Here we have one that is a 1st grade student, Will, and we're going to look at nonsense word fluency. Now, I had a student this morning who met the benchmark. He was a 1st grader, and he met the benchmark for oral reading fluency, but he did not meet it for nonsense word fluency. And when we looked at his booklet, it looked like for oral reading fluency, he mostly was reading sight words and he wasn't super accurate. And when we looked at his nonsense words, his data looked a lot like this, actually. It was around 20 sounds and he had 0 whole words read. And the teacher said, yeah, he's really struggling. And so we want to make sure that we always progress monitor at the lowest level skill and set our goal in the lowest level skill that the student has not yet mastered. We don't need to be monitoring 5 different skills, but we want to monitor the lowest level skill and set our goal there. So for Will, if we were going to set a goal for him for nonsense word fluency, what do you think would be an appropriate goal for Will for nonsense word fluency? If you remember, I said there isn't really a standard for how many he should get per week, but what we want to do is we want to get him there as soon as possible. So what do you think on the poll? What would be an appropriate goal for Will? All right, I see. Okay, a couple people have responded. And just in the essence of time, we're going to go ahead and go on to the next chart here. What we did, what we would probably do for Will, we have a whole semester, and we're going to go ahead and set it for him at, we want him to get there. We want to accelerate his growth. We want him to get to 58 correct letter sounds with 13 whole words read. The reason is that, yep, he's pretty far behind, but we need to accelerate his growth. We need to get him into oral reading fluency as soon as possible. And usually for these kids, with some good intervention, we can get them there. So for Will, we just took his starting point and we went ahead and put his goal here at 58 correct letter sounds, and we made our goal line up here at 58. Now, for nonsense words, I usually recommend that you have 2 goal lines. So we have one up here at 58. This one down here, we're setting it at 13 because we also want to make sure we're tracking the whole words. Will had some sounds, but he didn't have any whole words, and we want to make sure that we're monitoring those whole words. So we would have both areas. We'd have correct letter sounds up here, and we would have whole words down here. No aim line down here usually. Usually we just track it, and we want them to get to this level.
So if he met that goal, would you move him into oral reading fluency even though he met the goal for oral reading fluency?
I would definitely, if we're monitoring him on nonsense word fluency, I would definitely move him into oral reading fluency.
And try to increase the accuracy.
Yep, try to increase the accuracy and just really keep close tabs on him as the semester goes on. Good question. Okay. One more example here, and this is Gail. Gail is also a first grade student, and she too, let's say that she did also make the benchmark for oral reading fluency, but here is Gail, and she is sitting at 42 correct letter sounds with 6 whole words read. So really, she's not that far off of the benchmark. So here's where some of that judgment comes into play. What I would do for her is I would set a shorter term goal, and you can see that our goal is not way over here like the other ones were, it's here. So what we wrote up here is that goal is 58 correct letter sounds with 13 whole words read by January 20th, 2014, because we want to accelerate her growth and she's close to getting there. We don't want to wait a whole semester or a whole 15 weeks and then set a new goal. We want her to get here as soon as possible, and we want the teacher to be aware that we want her to get there quickly, and we want the student to be aware that she should be moving along quickly. So because she was pretty close, it's okay to set a shorter term goal, such as this one, like in January or February. And you can do that with oral reading fluency too. We've done that before, where we want to, maybe a student is in first grade material, but we want to get them into second grade material as soon as possible.
And your decision rules might tell you to only progress monitor a student that's close to the goal once a month or every other week. But if you set a shorter goal, you'll probably want to check in every week.
Yep, definitely, definitely. Yeah, to get that data so that you could move into the next level, or you could discontinue sooner if you wanted. Exactly. Okay. So just to end, if you have any questions, go ahead and type those in and we'll try to answer those. But just as we close here, remember this is not an exact science. We hope that this gave you, I know it's a brief overview, gave you a little bit of practice. Your school psychologist can certainly help you with goal setting. And so, you can contact your school psychologist. You could email Gina or I any questions that you have. You just have to remember there's not always that hard and fast rule to go by. It's not exactly exact science yet. So you're going to have to make some judgment calls. There will be some tricky ones. And so if you need help, there's always resources out there where you can go to. So thanks for your attendance today. If you do have questions, you can email us. I'm just looking.
I say we'll stay for a little bit to see if there's any questions on the chat.
We'll stay around at the chat and see if there's any questions. Thanks for attending today, and hope you have a great rest of your first week back to school. Thanks.